Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. My immune system is also struggling a little bit today. I'm feeling a lot better than I sound, but very happy to be here. Um, as said previously, I'm talking about teamwork time, which I previously shared in the showcase, education showcase. Uh, and I will just dive in. So I was going to show everyone the video that really motivated me to work on this. And then I realized that the only reason I had access to that video was because I was in the Inclusive STEM Teaching Project through edX. And there will be no copyright infringement today. Um, so I'll instead talk about what the video had and why it resonated with me and why, the motivation for teamwork time. Um, so the video itself was maybe 4 minutes long. It was from the uh, Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, CRLT players. So it was a little bit more like you could tell people were acting. Um, but there were a lot of things there that really resonated with me. The teacher gave kind of vague instructions. We're going to have group work on an example problem for the next few minutes, and you should group up in two to three people of groups of two to three. And in the case study example here, people grouped up based on where they could scoot their chairs. Some people were just completely disengaged with the group work. Other people were talking over others. And some people who were trying to engage just eventually gave up because they kept being talked over. And this made me remember, flashback a lot to a lot of the teamwork scenarios that I had that were also unstructured and also like there was no guidance on how to work together well. And in a lot of ways, this snowballed after many years and became more maladaptive uh, teamwork strategies. So after being part of this teaching project and watching this video and being more motivated, I started to focus more on teamwork. What can I do to help the teamwork early on? Um, so when to implement teamwork time? Of the classes that I taught, or I teach and used to teach, I teach senior design, which is a capstone design project. Student teams are developing a medical device with our FDA design waterfall in mind. Junior design is more focusing on modeling and more canned projects, but still being introduced to the design process. For both of these two, I found that for my seniors, it was hard to motivate their change because it was their last semester. They had a plan. They knew what they were going to be doing in the next 6 months. And they just needed to get past this teamwork problem. For my junior teams, I found that they were more receptive to changing and working together and having these open communication skills. But it required a little bit more intervention because they started to learn their ways. The sophomore level labs seem like a good time because it's early enough, like they've had a year where they've learned a little bit more about how they work in teams, but not so late that they've already formed these habits. I will say that this is my opinion based on observations from my classes. If I had more time to do the engineering education route, I would do more research on this. Um, but there were some challenges with choosing the sophomore level labs. Um, I needed something that was very quick and easy to implement. Um, a little bit more detail on the sophomore level labs. Um, sorry. Uh, we have three core courses in our undergraduate curriculum at U of M in the BME department related to biomechanics, biochemistry and thermodynamics, and circuits. And each of these three core courses that are required for the undergraduate degree have a lecture component and a lab component. And for the lab component, we tried to have cohesion between the three courses. So we have a shared lab resource canvas with training modules. This includes like lab safety, how to use lab notebooks and lab archives. And it also includes a brief segment on teamwork to kind of talk about some good teamwork strategies, what a team contract or a team charter might look like, and also to introduce them to the CAPME peer evaluation software that we use for the labs. Um, these aren't super in-depth, they're just PowerPoints that the students go through and then answer a few questions. But that's kind of part of the setting for this. Of all the 3 courses, the students do this module once and it counts for all the 3 courses. Another few things about these sophomore level labs. They're meant to be 0 credit labs. They are meant to be, instead of meeting every single week like a typical lab would, in any single course, the students meet 3 to 4 times throughout the entire semester with 3 hours per lab. 12 total in-person lab hours per course. If, for one course. If a student were to take all 3 in a semester, which we don't recommend, but it happens sometimes, they would have a lab each week rotating between the 3 classes. So that's kind of the big picture of what that looks like from the back end. And then from what the students see, they're only meeting up with their teams 3 times a semester for 3 hours. I also want to just add that the assignments per lab are, the individual pre-lab that's due at the beginning of the lab is 1% of the overall course grade. The lab notebook is 1% of the overall course grade and is individual. The post-lab or lab report, there's 2 post-labs, 1 lab report for these 3 labs, is about 2 to 4% of the course grade. And then there's a CAPME peer evaluation after the lab, after the post-lab and lab report. That's 0.05% of the overall course grade. All of this is to say the entire lab component of the course is about 15% of the course grade, and each individual teaming moment is not worth that many points. And so one of the challenges with this teamwork time is that it needs to be so quick and easy to implement and so quick and easy for the students to buy into that they're not just like, you know what, this is worth 1%. I don't really care about this. I'm just going to do my thing and move on. Particularly, the added thing there is that we want to have the teams invested in getting better teaming strategies. And so we keep the teams consistent throughout the entire semester. I will also add quickly that, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I don't actively teach these labs now. Now I've focused more on junior and senior design, but the people who are currently teaching these classes are still continuing this teamwork time. And they're in the room, so thank you for joining. Okay, so that's the setting. I will try to pick the pace up a little bit. How do I actually implement the teamwork time? A very brief overview, now that we know the setting a little bit. I added questions to the pre-lab, which are more self-reflection teamwork questions. I'll show those in a second. For the first 5 to 10 minutes of the lab, out of the whole 3 hours, I added teamwork time where I have the students have a group discussion over these questions that they reflected on in their pre-lab. Something that I find helpful is after the lab, having just looking at the peer evaluations and seeing what kind of problems were arising, and then using that to feed into the third component of this teamwork time is the follow-up, a class-wide conflict resolution tips later. I will say that I don't think the CAPME is required, or I don't think you have to go in and look at these peer evaluations. Any kind of conflict management strategies being mentioned, I think would be helpful. And over the past few semesters of me teaching this, I realized that the problems tend to repeat. So I didn't have to update the conflict management strategies too much. Okay. So, pre-lab questions. This is a little bit text heavy, so I'll try to go through this slowly. This is completely pulled out of the last iteration of the pre-lab that I was working with. I'm not sure if it's been updated since then, but this is the most recent version that I have. And there's 6 questions that I have the students think about. The first one is more of a self-reflection. What are your personal goals for this lab? Do you want to be learning new techniques? Do you want to be practicing practicing your techniques, or are you just trying to get through because this is a difficult subject? Whatever those happen to be, trying to get the students to think about what their personal goals are. I also have them reflect a little bit more about like what kind of experience do you already have? What can you bring to the table? Or is this completely new? And then when the students are talking about this in a group, they can get a feel for, okay, I have experience and this person doesn't, or they do and I don't. How can we work together? The obstacle question, I like to think improves a little bit of more empathy. So that way, if students do have something outside of the classroom that's going to be an obstacle for them in the next week or so, then the rest of the team knows about it. This is assuming the student is willing to share that information, and that's always up to them. The last two questions, or I guess the last three questions are really like how is the team going to work together? The how do you propose the team divide the work? Um, Gets at how they're going to split everything up. I will say a quick note here. I've realized that this language tends to prime the students for dividing and conquering. So if anyone wants to implement this, I would probably actually even suggest updating the language to like, how do you propose that your team assign responsibilities, or even how do you propose that the team complete this work together to try and encourage them to like work together as opposed to dividing and conquering. Um, think back to your previous group projects for incorporating or avoiding what kind of experiences would you like to incorporate or avoid for this lab. The purpose there is to really have them think about what outcomes, this is kind of leading into the conflict management strategies later, what kind of outcomes you would like to avoid or strive for. Um, and then that last one, what's your preferred team communication, is really like if you don't know each other already, exchange numbers, exchange group meets, exchange emails. And that really sets the stage for their future group work. In the pre-lab, they also are told that there will be 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of lab reserved to discuss these, and they could incorporate a team charter of some sorts or an expectations document. But that is not required. I'm not recording that, and I'm not assigning points to that. Okay. So the previous one was the pre-lab questions. When they arrive to the lab, the first thing I do is this projector in the room has this slide as they're entering the room, and it helps them, there's a map of the room that's just helping, that's my class specific. And then I let them know that as they're sitting down for the first 5 to 10 minutes, go back to your pre-labs, talk about these questions, and when you're done, put on your lab coats, your gloves, your safety glasses, and then I'll get that visual cue that everyone has been done talking about that. And at 10 minutes, if everyone's not in their PPE, then I'll like pause and tell them to continue this after the initial presentation. So those are the first two components, and that's, adding questions to the pre-lab, using the first 5 to 10 minutes of lab for this group discussion. After the lab, the helpful optional thing, if you're new to the class or you aren't really sure what kind of trouble your teams are running into, I find looking at the peer evaluations and getting an idea of what kind of constructive feedback would be helpful to give the whole class. And then you can also word it in a way like, hey, some of you may have had conflicts in your teams. That's understandable. That's expected. Here are some general themes that I saw, and here are some strategies I recommend. So those can be helpful if you aren't sure what to say there, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And then the last thing here is the following up with the class-wide conflict resolution tips. When they enter the third lab, this is, the same thing, a little bit simpler because they should know where all the tables are at this point. I do add, are there any updates from your teamwork questions from the before? sort of prompting them with that first. And then I have this blue box of helpful ideas. Zoom into that for a second. Um, I use this to kind of start an intro to conflict management strategies. These aren't the only strategies, these are just the ones that I find are helpful. Um, and you can tailor them based on whatever peer review, peer evaluation you do. I personally focused on, what outcomes do you want to avoid this time, focusing on outcomes instead of people, and then encouraging students to think of it as, okay, there's this outcome we want to avoid. How can each person on the team work towards avoiding that outcome? And then it's not just singling one person out for not doing the post lab until the last day. It's how can we all meet up earlier and whatnot. Um, what worked well last time, what did not work last time. When I was a student, I would just try the same thing over and over again and get mad that I wasn't able to do 30 minutes of work in 15 minutes. So this is my touch point to say, if it didn't work the last 2 times, try something new. Don't keep punishing yourself. So yeah, at the beginning of this third lab, as everyone is sitting down, I kind of point out this blue box and I briefly go through these helpful conflict management ideas and say, look at these teamwork questions you've done, see if there's any updates and things we want to reflect on before we get started. One key thing is I don't actually collect any of the teamwork expectation charters, and I don't grade these specific things. That could be something in the future I do, is having them actually write out what they did for these questions and then trying to gauge on if it was helpful or not. Anecdotally, I believe that it is helpful, but this could be investigated more. So overall, the teamwork time summary, I added a few questions to the pre-lab. I added the first 5 to 10 minutes of this 3-hour lab to have group discussion. And then I tried to follow up on either a second or third lab after they've hit a point where a conflict definitely arises. Sometimes the conflict doesn't, arise until the second lab. Sometimes the conflict happens in the first lab, trying to have that follow up. And the questions in general, I think, can just be adjusted to fit the need. I had a couple examples of this. During the ASEE 2024 Education Showcase, I tried to tailor the questions to be in the room. Everyone is going to form groups, and you're going to email me with your answers to one of these 2 questions. So I tailored it to, I added sub-bullets to, like, do you actually want to send me an email or implement in your class? Who takes notes, adds, edits, sends the email? In this case, the sub-bullets give a little bit more context as to what I'm expecting from the group work. So then if anyone either has deer in the headlights from the sudden group work or doesn't have as much experience with group work, they have a little bit of something to go off of. So I think that these short questions can be very, very versatile based on what you need for the activity. And then the last one is, this is the original version of the questions. They're very much the same. They're just worded as you're in your group right now discussing these questions together. In which case, if you have the time, if it's in a class period as opposed to a lab period, and you want to spend time on a really, really short teamwork expectations or teamwork charter, then that could be another way to do it. All right. So thank you. I'm very open to questions. And in case there's crickets, I have these questions from the ASCE showcase to start with.